quickly go over what some of those basic shapes are that are really important. I think the first shape that I probably use more than anything whenever you're drawing, this is going to be like a basic cube shape, okay? One of the things I've noticed when people go to draw like a cube, one of the things that they do is that they often will do this and they just sort of leave it alone. And one of the negative sides to that is when you're stacking multiple shapes together, you're often forgetting this really important aspect right here, which is that line that connects to there, that line that goes back there, and the way that those two lines connect back up there. If you can't draw through that shape, there's an issue there. In fact, that is probably the most common mistake that most art students don't do, is they're sort of taught by observation. You know, they're taught to look at like a still life. They look at the still life and they're drawing, you know, basic shapes overlapping each other, but then they're not thinking about, wait a minute, how does this shape come back here? How does that connect and land on the ground? And then how does this cylinder like land behind it? You know, so that's really an important part of drawing, is to really understand that. So I start off with basically what you could do is, when I was teaching the class, one of the things I would do is I would just throw out like a horizon line. The reason I throw out this horizon line is more as just a guide placement. So you know that if you're drawing shapes underneath that, you'd be seeing on top of them. And then if you're drawing shapes above that, you'd be seeing underneath them. However, though, this shape is towards me but tilted. And believe it or not, a lot of students don't see this being a great exercise. It's actually a tremendous exercise, because when you get in here and you start sketching ideas for shapes, eventually what's going to happen is you're going to get tired of drawing them like up on the same point of view. So what I mean by that is most students will start with like a 1-point perspective, and then everything that they're sort of sketching will always end up sort of coming out the same, which there's nothing wrong with that. But one of the things we need to do is we need to realize, you know, after I'd say about a page of sketching, you're going to be sketching and you're going to realize like, wait a minute here, why are all my shapes always sort of looking the same? You know, and there's the reason for that is you're staying horizontal. So what will eventually start to happen is you'll start to turn your shapes a little bit. And when you turn your shapes, there's really a huge advantage of that, because you're basically teaching yourself how to start thinking about manipulating and rotating shapes at different angles. And when you do that, that's pivotal. One of the huge benefits of doing that is being in a figure drawing class, being able to look at a model and then draw them from another angle without having to get up and reposition yourself. So you're taking the information that's visually available for you, and then you're just rotating it. And that might sound like a really hard task, but it's actually somewhat easy in the long run. So to do it just takes a little bit of practice. So after you get tired of drawing shapes that have this sort of common, if you're doing this as an exercise in a sketchbook, and it is a really great exercise too for a sketchbook. Let me get red here. Once you get tired of having these lines always sort of horizontal like that, what you can start doing is start tilting those shapes, still being above or below the horizon line. And so an example of that would be me starting here. And now if I take this cube shape and then I start to bring it down, I'm tilting one view of it. And then by tilting it, it's now going to force me to sort of see this view like that. So it's above me, but now I'm grabbing it and pulling it down. And then once again, you need to really come in here and you need to sort of figure out, you need to quickly draw and sketch where those back lines would be. And even if it's really faint, that's totally fine, because usually you'll be a little bit off. And then once you get those in there, it'll give you a better idea. The purpose of that is when we go a step above this, where we start carving into shapes, that's going to be a huge advantage to us when we can draw through them and cut through them. So when students immediately come back in and they go, hey, I don't want to draw through shapes at all, it's sort of, they might think it's pointless or there's no purpose for it. That's really a negative thought, because what's going to happen later on when you're getting into more complex shapes, for example, like having to draw a castle, you're going to fall apart because you're not going to understand how to cut through the shapes. You're not going to understand how to do additive shapes. So there's sort of like two methods of drawing that come back a little bit later. One is additive construction. The other one is subtractive construction. And it's pretty much exactly how it sounds. It's you just going in there and either adding a series of shapes on top of each other, or taking shapes and then carving into them to make other interesting shapes to look at. So if I sit here, basically I can just fill up a page, but one of the things I like to tell students to do is try taking the axis of a shape, like that would be the axis line like that, which feels like a 90. Try taking that and then throwing it on a turn like that. So if you do that, if you throw it on a turn, you can start with a light line and you can think of that as a center line. And that's going to help guide you to taking something and rotating it at a different angle. And then it'll allow you to sort of see how that shape might be sort of constructing and coming about. Okay, so if you do that, for me, it's always been a very effective way to get into my sketches, because I'm always thinking about center lines. So if I have a line that goes down that side, I can see where that center line goes to the back, and then I can see where it comes back here. Center lines really allow me to divide up shape. And if you go into any of your sketches that you're doing, you'll immediately see what starts to happen when you start to turn an object. So if you start to rotate something and compress it in an angle, that center line really becomes an important part of the drawing feeling correct and the drawing feeling accurate to the viewer. We might see a little bit of the underside there like that. Okay, and then I can come back to here, draw through that shape. And then again, you can hit the center line, draw the center line in there really quick, and it might lightly be seen right there like so. Okay, so basically this would be like sort of step number one. That center line, the reason why it's so important is when you're drawing the human figure, there's a center line. When you're drawing props and vehicles, there's center lines. So understanding how other shapes might interact or sit on top of this is going to be huge. And then another reason why the center line is so important to me is because the ground plane is sitting below the center line. So we're not drawing bugs right now, but if I'm drawing bugs or a vehicle, one of the things I will do is I will come down and drop a dotted line like this, and then it allows me to establish basically where my center line is above the ground plane. So if I know that, for example, if I'm working on something more complex like a mech, the benefit of that is then I could come in here, I can take, let's say I'm drawing a leg that's going to come up like this. Now I understand where that line is going to go, and I understand how that leg is going to hit that mark right there in relationship to the rest of the body. And then that allows me also to come back over here to the other side and then to figure the same thing out. I can take that connection point. I could come over here. I can eyeball sort of the length of it. I can even guess the width of that of A, and I could replicate A being over there. And then it allows me to sort of come in here and get that to match up, which makes sense. Now, where that's just a front view, which is somewhat minor. Where that's huge is when we start drawing the legs back behind it. So if I come back here and draw the center, now we need to find the center line for that mark there. So this is the benefit of why shapes why we want to drop through the shapes and why we want to have center lines. Because now if I put that leg there, as I come through right here, I have to find that middle line, then I draw a dotted line down like this, and I would receive this line back towards the vanishing point. By doing that, now I understand this is going to be the center line for the legs that would be connecting in the back of my spider or my bug right here. Okay, so this is, and then here I'm just going to draw them really quick. So imagine if I were to receive that backward, now I know part of this answer, which is if this leg connects to here, I can receive that back to there, which means this would be, the knee point would be landing about there, the legs would come out to about here, and then this leg would connect about there. And you can look at it and it's going to feel accurate in the drawing. So I sort of, yeah, what's up? Yeah.
Do you over time get a level of intuition on this? Like I understand that you're mapping out the points and the mathematics of it. Like at a certain point, do you internally develop an intuition for mapping these points out?
It's not as much. Yes, you do 100%. Yes, over time in practice. And the other thing I was going to comment after I drew this other leg set in here was going to be, I'll just sketch. So the other leg will be overlapped a little bit. And it's going to land about here, let's say. But it'll make, oops, I meant to erase some of that. Oh, my eraser's not working. Oops, hold on a minute. I'm on the wrong layer. Give me 1 second. Let me erase this real quick here. I got to go back to brush, and I have to switch to white paint now. there. I meant to end that other leg about there. So what does happen, and this will happen to you the more that you draw and sketch, is I start to see things in shape in my head. Like when I look at a drawing, I look at a vehicle. The only difference between, let's say, a hot rod vehicle, to me, is just a series of shapes all put together with then detail on those shapes. Something more complex than that might be like if there was an alien movie and there was a space mover for troops to take them into battle. That might be much more complex. So the shapes might be angled, but the detail will be more complex on top of it. So I'm constantly just thinking about shape, and then I'm also thinking about how do I draw those shapes, and then how do I rotate them at different angles. And sometimes what'll happen is like I'll think of something like a castle or rocks or whatever, and I'm just thinking of the shape that they exist in, and then I could draw it really quickly. So in my head, I'm almost rotating shapes and imagining, like, you know, in Maya, you have a 3D world, right? I'm almost imagining what those shapes look like as mesh objects, and then I'm just drawing what I'm seeing in my head back onto a piece of paper. And so that's what gives you that speed and ability to sort of draw, you know, bugs and cars and whatever really quickly from like your imagination. So this is a great way to practice, because if you go into your sketching and you start basically drawing a complexity of shapes, you'll start mapping them together, and excuse me, I should have said grouping them together, and you'll start creating complex objects very effectively. And then you'll look at the object, and there should be no detail on it. It should just be the object itself. And this is the thing I really feel that should be taught on a regular basis in all basic drawing classes is you shouldn't even be looking at still lifes. They treat you like children, like you don't have this visual ability to look and imagine shapes. And then they label that and they call it, well, that's drawing from the imagination. Well, no, it's not. It's understanding the core shapes that exist out of everything and how they exist in a world plane. And once you can draw those shapes and get more complex, then you get into more complex shapes. So you don't always need to be looking at something, looking at a stack of boxes with a light on them. That's like, you're teaching them something, but you're not teaching them something. You're teaching them to look and analyze, but then you're not teaching them how to determine that and come to that conclusion on their own. And then you make people reliant on reference and make them reliant on having to have a still life. And I get this all the time where students go, I just can't imagine it. I need to see it. I'm like, well, that's because you've been trained since the 6th grade on how to do this, you know? So if you go in and just start, you know, always think about the axes of a shape. And then I just think about, you know, if I'm tilting something, you know, how am I drawing it? What's the length of it? The other thing too is if I do this exercise and fill up a page of drawings, I'm doing it. I try to do it freehand, because doing it freehand, sometimes when I'm drawing here, I can hold shift to get a straight line, but then on lines that I can't do that, there's going to be a little bit of a limitation. The reason why I try to do it freehand is I'm sort of teaching myself where these other lines should be, and then I'm getting a better understanding of how the center lines would match up to everything that I'm drawing. Okay, so
Phil, I got a quick question, and I know you just answered it, but it's like I want to ingrain it in my head. So if everything that we draw, whether it's characters, whether it's that spider that you just showed us, a robot, anything, should always be based on basic constructed shapes, correct? And
100% yes.
Okay, yeah. And it should also be put in perspective also, correct, to be able to get the proportions right.
Well, yes. Sometimes no, this is why. It depends on what the perspective is. You need to be aware of where your horizon line is when you're looking at something. So the problem with that is that if you haven't been trained with perspective fundamentals, you'll be looking at an object. So you're drawing a mech. The mech doesn't exist. You're creating it by looking at reference, right? So you need to consciously think to yourself, where is my horizon line going to be, and what is my angle of view of looking at the mech? If I raise my angle of view, my horizon line up, my angle of view is looking down on the mech. If I drop my horizon line down really low, I might be looking up at the mech. So a student needs to be taught that first, because if they don't understand that principle of moving horizon lines up and down and establishing what they call a point of view or an angle of view, then you're setting yourself up for like disaster immediately. So I think a mech is a great example where you can't really like, you can pull up mech reference and look at it, but you really need to pay attention to where's the horizon line and how is that artist drawing the shapes. Artists that really know what they're doing, that were taught solid form and constructive drawing and perspective, they understand where horizon lines are. So for most of the time, yes. But what happens then if I do a close-up of an object and I'm looking at it and I don't see my horizon line in the picture? You also have to understand how to construct that. You know what I mean? So let's say I dove into this right now, let's say I drive into my paper and I just come into like this and I say, hey, I'm going to draw some type of a mech. So I start coming in here, I start drawing core shapes. What's the problem right now as I'm drawing, Chris?
So the proportions are off. You're not using the top is off. You're not using the vanishing point. There is no vanishing point.
Yeah, so you're right. I'm drawing it what would be called sort of like, basically some of my proportions, I could fix them as I keep going. But the difference is my horizon line is now gone. I'm looking down extremely on my drawing. So I know if I want to get more accurate construction in part of my sketch here, one of the things I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to get in there, and then I'm going to have to consider where my vanishing points are in my horizon, right? So you could quickly see as I start sketching something and putting it together, that's going to be part of my next battle, is really understanding how the construction of this guy is working and coming together. Because without that, I'm going to have a limitation to drawing this particular sketch. And the limitation I'm going to have is going to be, let's bring the leg the other way. It's going to be based upon the issue of understanding where all the points are on my drawing, because I don't have a horizon line. So if you have a horizon line and you understand where the grid is, and you're being a little bit more consistent, understanding where your points are, you're going to have a higher rate of success. So I'm trying to answer that question that Tim had asked, or one of you guys had just asked, which is, do you always have to understand where the horizon line is? And part of my answer to that is yes, you want to be accurate, but what happens in this view? I don't have a horizon line right now. I don't have vanishing points. When in this particular type of view, this is where we sort of get what we call an isometric view, where we're looking down at it really close. Our horizon line is way up above somewhere. I don't have any points plotted. So I have to look at this and I have to be able to answer questions, which I'm asking in the back of my brain. And some of these questions are this. They are, I'm thinking to myself, what is the center line of my little bug shape here? Okay, and not only the center line, but if I come here and if I take that leg and I bring that leg over, I'm exactly this high above the ground right there. And if I were to draw that line going back in this direction, even if my hand's shaking a little bit, what that does is it now allows me to come over to draw through to the other side, and I could figure out the height. I can bring this line back here. I can figure out the height of the knee over here. I can then bring this line back down like so. And I could just keep going back into this, and I could keep constructing part of my shape, figuring out, where the legs are matching and what's going to be seen, what's not going to be seen. So here, this one, if I bring this line out, it dips slightly underneath that line. So if I draw a line from here, hold on a minute, if I draw a line coming back this way, figure out where that is in relationship to there, it gives me a better idea that I'm about that high there, about there. And then if I come over to here, I can now figure out, okay, from there, my leg's going to come out a little bit to about here, and then it's going to dive down to about there. And then those proportions will feel correct. However, though, I hope I answered that question. I wasn't plotting points there. I had to go back and construct it out of my head because I'm looking down on it. And there might be some angles slightly off or a couple proportions, but that's mainly because I had to ditch any point of view of a horizon, and there's no vanishing points for me to match up to. That's why when I tell students to sketch and draw, they should always be consistently thinking about where is your horizon inside your environment. And your horizon, remember, this is where students get confused. Your horizon line can be dictated at different times by two different points, okay? If I walk into a room or I'm walking down a hallway, my horizon line is my eye level of my eyes, correct? Okay? Because I'm in a structure and I'm seeing the world. So anything, imagine you're standing in a hallway at a school or in a hospital, and imagine there's beds on the side of you. Okay? If I'm walking down that hall, the height of an average bed in a hospital is only about, I'd say, 3 to 5 feet high. So if I'm walking down that hallway, I'm going to be looking down on top of the beds, correct? Now, if I happen to be, my buddy's wife is really short. She's like 4'1". If she's walking down the hallway, I'm 6 foot. So if she's walking down the hallway at 4'1", she might barely be seeing over the beds because those beds can be 3 to 4 feet tall. Some of them can raise. So do you see the difference there? Her point of view would be different. Now, if I go outside and I'm looking at a cityscape, my eye level is in the piece, but the horizon line can be dictated by the world that's in it. It's where the street would end, if that makes sense. Okay? So the horizon line now in front of me is going to be dictated by the plane of the earth. So if I look down like Chapman Avenue or a really popular long street, okay, that I will see where that street ends. I'll see the horizon, and where I'm standing, I will see everything converging to a set of vanishing points in that direction. So what we just did there is we sort of talked about establishing two different points of view. It's the angle of view of the viewer in a location, and then also the world that's also dictating the view as well. And those are two different ways that we set up part of a horizon line, okay? So this would always be like exercise number one I would tell students to do would be to start just working with basic shapes. Now, let's start drawing some more complex shapes in here, okay? We started with a cube. What's the next basic shape, which is always sort of a pain in the butt to draw, is going to be a sphere. And spheres, the reason why it's going to be hard to draw is it's a rounded shape, and it's really hard for us to try to get that rounded shape because you almost have to rotate your paper. You can get to one side with your wrist going at an angle, and then you sort of stop on the other side, okay? However, though, once we get that sphere in, I like to think of them as lemons because when you're drawing a sphere, there's a couple things that need to happen. Number one, if I draw a sphere in relationship to my horizon line, then if I look at this horizon line here, I'm going to have a series of circles. So I'm going to have a midpoint, and I like to think of these as rubber bands. It's going to wrap around. These are going to be ellipses. They're going to wrap around part of my sphere. They're going to give it shape and form, okay, like this. So this is a somewhat simple shape to draw in terms of it just being round. Now, what happens, though, if my shape is lower on the horizon line here, but it's tilted towards me, how do you draw that then? That's where you have to stop and think a little bit. So if I come over here and if I draw another sphere shape like this is where I tend to think of these as maybe being like a lemon. Okay, so if I draw, hold on a minute, I should have drawn on a separate layers, my bad for waking up, not thinking about that. So now if I come over here, this is where I think of my shapes as a lemon. So lemons have that little pronounced little part that comes out like this. So if I come in here and wrap lines, even if my lines are a little crooked, that's okay, around my object here, and they don't have to be perfect. Can you see how that sort of feels like a lemon now? Right? In there? That's what a lemon or a radish might look like at a lower angle, but here's the catch. Where is that in relationship to my horizon line right now? It's underneath my horizon line, which allows me to see on top of that shape. And the other thing that's happening is I have an axis point in this, which is going, oops, sorry, my ruler, I slipped there. I have an axis point going this direction. In this direction, my axis point was staying straight up and down. So that's another thing to think about. If you go to draw the sphere, you want to put like a needle in it, and you want to think about drawing it from multiple angles, okay? because the rounded curve of that spherical shape, whether you call it a contour line or a rubber band. I like when I was younger, Marshall Vanderiff used to always talk about wrapping things with rubber bands, and that really got me to think about, wow, I could draw anything I want as long as I wrap it with a rubber band. Then later when I started working in Maya and modeling sets, in Maya we thought of that as mesh. And I always say the wrong word. I always say typology, which is a study of fonts. I think it's topology, which is the outside structure of the lines wrapping around an object. Okay. But either way, to me, it's just wrapping shapes with rubber bands, because when I'm drawing environments, I have hill shapes. So I need to wrap rubber bands over those hill shapes. I have trees that I have to wrap rubber bands over. And one of the benefits of wrapping rubber bands over elements is when you go to digital painting, you will understand the flow of the contour of that particular element that you're drawing, and then it allow you to paint going with that flow, if that makes sense. For example, the flow of texture, this could be a radish or this could be a lemon. So if this was, let's say, a lemon and I have that textured scale on it, my scales are going to be wrapping this way around the shape and the form of the object, right? And if I went in to paint this is a common painting problem. If I went in to paint this and I just painted a texture going like this, what would be the problem? What would happen if my texture...
You're not losing scale.
Would what?
You're not losing scale.
Yeah, well, I'm not wrapping the texture around the shape and the form, so I would kill the object in the painting. So my texture on my object, if I go to paint it, is going to it needs to wrap around a little bit. So let's say that I had a little texture like this coming around, and then these little circles sort of wrap around it like this. Then my texture is now adhering to the shape and contour of the object. That's sort of the next phase after this. This is to me, drawing is like simple shapes. It's finding the center line of those shapes, is then creating more complex shape. Then it's understanding textures, and then how to wrap textures around the contour of that object. Most of the students that go into digital painting the first time, the reason why they tend not to do too good is because they're not thinking about, or they haven't been trained in really understanding shapes and understanding the contour lines of those shapes. Okay, so let's go back to spheres. Let's draw a couple more spheres in here. So, what happens if I come back here and if I have a box that's sitting, on slightly above my horizon line, and then on my box, what happens now if I have a lemon on there, right? So I could come in here. One of the things students would do is they might come in here and they might go like this, and they start to draw a lemon. Well, I might do that, but one of the things I like to do really quickly is I come in here and I like to establish and figure out where that back wall is going to be. The reason why that's important to me is now I could sort of see through that shape that's there, and I can see the construction line that goes underneath that. Even if my drawing's a little bit off, I'm not plotting points right now. I'm just free drawing, okay? But now that I see that, do you see how I could come over here and now I could come in here and I can draw a lemon like this because I could feel where that lemon is sort of landing. And then I could come in here and I could say like, okay, I'm hitting right here, which means I'm going to have a center line that wraps around my lemon into that direction. I'm going to have another center line that goes like this. If I draw through the other side, I might have a cut through like that. And then if I got this side, I might have a cut through like this. So, and then my lemons always tend to have that little point. So you come to like right about here, they tend to pop out maybe just a little bit like this. Okay. Then I could come back, and then lemons also, they connect to little branching systems. They tend to have little leaves that come off of the corner of that lemon. So I could get that in there, and then I could ask somebody, does that feel like a lemon sitting on a box? It does, right? I mean, for a quick sketch, it's matching. I haven't rendered it, but the contour line and the shape is there to match up what's happening inside the drawing. Okay. So then as I continue on this, this is what I'm always thinking of in the back of my head, no matter what I do. I'm thinking that, hey, there's a center line that wraps around that object. That center line then ... comes to this box here. it then drops down to here, and then that center line's wrapping back up to the other side. And here I even drew that angle off because I'm freehanding real quick. And then if I go up and then I bring that back over, it's basically almost like I took a hot butter knife and I cut that in half. You see how I could feel all that, the lines and detail in there? That's pivotal to me to understanding how multiple shapes then interact with each other. Okay. All right. Let me just keep drawing a couple more. So another great thing you could do, another great thing with drawing ellipses is cutting ellipses in half. Ellipses, especially an ellipse chopped in half that creates like this really nice rounded wedge shape. There's all kinds of really good things you can do with that shape. So here's what I'm talking about like that. Just come in here and try to sketch like a basic ellipse. Just freehand like that. Just really simple. Now, I have a way I prefer to draw ellipses that makes a little bit more sense to me, that's more tangible. Some students like to do it their own way. They just do this, and then they go like this, and they connect the top on top of the ellipse. That technically works. However, check this out. If I come over here, and if I think this is how I was sort of taught, that there's a major axis along my ellipse that's running in that direction. Therefore, perpendicular to that, there's a minor axis in there. So I don't always have to draw the major, but I could look at this and go, I have a minor there. I could find the middle dot, draw a line up, then I can draw a line from that edge to there, and then I can draw a line then coming back to here. And do you see how much more construction I have in my shape now by doing that? Then I could go dot, dot, dot up to here, and then I could bring this other line back down to there. And look at the construction that's following. Does that make sense? Do you see how much more tangible that object is now? I think we lost Chris there for a minute. Hold on, and I'm sorry I didn't have the chat room open. Let me pull that up real quick. Okay. Well, there's a huge...
I was just taking notes.
Oh, okay, sure. So anyway, so now I can draw halves of ellipses, and I can squash spheres, and I can figure out how to sort of do it by drawing through the shape a little bit. In fact, let me imagine this is something that really adapts itself when we have basic shapes like we were just drawing a circle and a sphere over on the side, right? What happens when we contort that shape a little bit? This is what I mean by that. So watch when I do this one. I'm going to draw another ellipse. Okay. I'm going to put a line across, find the middle. I'm going to draw a line up. I'm going to bring this line up to about there. I'm going to round this back down to here. I'm going to draw through the shape, get a line coming on that backside. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this line going downward like this, and I'm going to bring my ellipse down more like so, like so. Oops, sorry, I'm shifting a little bit. Like that. Now I'm going to continue with these center lines coming down to about there, and then continue that body line coming down there. So do you see the shape I just created very, very sort of effectively? It's a spherical shape, right? But now it's pinched. The top is shorter, the bottom's longer. So that's still, to me, a sphere. I just distorted the top and bottom view of it. So there's a huge advantage for me to distort my shapes really quickly, because human faces are distorted like this. The torsos of characters are distorted like this. In character design, we don't want everything to be perfect circles. You want them to be distorted in complex shapes that then create interesting new shapes by being pinched. That's why the term in animation, squash and stretch, was so important, you know, is that you can grab something and pull it down and modify it, you know. And then onto any shape that I'm drawing, and by the way, it doesn't have to be just circle. What if I bring this line straight down, bring that line straight down, and then I end it. And then if I come over here and I bring that line straight down, and I bring that one straight down, I'm just now basically what I'm doing in here. If I find the middle and crossing it, going back and forth here, I'm basically brought straight edges down, and then I'm rounding off where the bottom of this would connect. Does that make sense? How I just sort of constructed a different shape out of there? really quickly. My ellipse is a little bit off, but that's all right. It's quite a bit off because this one's a lot wider, so it should be a little bit larger. So let me read you that. What I should have done is this should have ended a little bit more up about in here. But that's okay to be off a little bit. It's just, it's not a test. It's just to draw like this and get used to creating shapes like this, like effectively in your sketchbook. So when you're going to draw something that's more complex, like a giant castle, you know, in an environment or a concept painting, you can figure out how to do that, and you can figure out how to make it, the whole thing work, you know? Okay. So, and then another great shape based off of circles or quarter wedges of spheres. I said circles, I meant spheres. So this is what a quarter wedge is. A quarter wedge is us coming in here like this, just drawing a line up, establishing that curve in there real quick like that. And then you draw this line back this way where that ends. You then round this element to here. And then you connect the line from the top to the bottom. That's a great shape used all the time. It's used for canopies. It's used for airplanes. It's used for fins, for wings. Okay, so let me just keep drawing for a little bit here. Let's go back to drawing a sphere now. So what happens if I come over here and sort of jump in here? This is why I hate about I'm on a Cintiq and I'm like irking like this, trying to get that elliptical shape in there. That's fine for right now. Doesn't have to be perfect, okay? Now, what are two different ways I could continue that shape right now? I could match it to the horizon line, and then I could wrap contour lines around it going horizontally to the horizon line, correct? Right? So I could come in here like this. Here, let me just do this. Let's just copy and paste this. Let's draw it twice. Let me bring that other, oops, I forgot I'm on one layer. Let me make that a little bit smaller. My bad for not adding that second layer. Let me make it a little bit smaller. There, okay? All right, so two ways I could finish that into a spherical shape right now. Option number one is I know I'm above the horizon line. I could come up here and I can draw a line going across and just understand these 2 points. Then what I can do is in relationship to the horizon line, I can do my best to try to match what that ellipse would be looking like if I draw through it like this. And if that ellipse is going to look like that, then I could wrap rubber bands around it like this. Sorry, I shifted there. Let me adjust my Cintiq over a minute. Okay, you see how that now has rubber bands around it? And then I could even come over here and I can wrap another rubber band going in the opposite direction, going this way. I can throw a center line wrapping around it, going that way. And then that starts to feel like an accurate shape that's existing, okay? On this other one, what if this one I had an axis line, oops. Hold on, I didn't mean to do that. This one I had my axis line pretty much running like this, straight down like that. What happens on this shape if my axis line is turned? Like what if I'm drawing imagine a bobber, you know, a fishing bobber, a bobber is going to be turned at a little bit of an angle. So if I come over here and now I'm going to have an axis line going like this, going through my shape, right, like that, then I could figure out, hold on, I was a little off there about there. Then I could come back and go, okay, this is going to be a bobber. So I'm going to have this part of my bobber is going to be extended out a little bit like so. Hold on, I keep shifting a little bit on let me reposition my Cintiq and myself. It keeps rolling away from me. Need to get these lines straight to that line. There we go, like that. Okay, so now I get this bobber tip sort of coming in here, Now I could come over here and I can draw a line and I can wrap another elliptical line around here. And I can say, hey, that's going to be the intersection of my bobber. And then even back here, if I draw through that where that ends right there, sometimes bobbers even have another back part that's a little bit longer like so. And then I could get that sort of in there. So now I get this other rounded shape that has a different axis line. My axis line is now going this way, right? But it's still above my horizon line. It's just turned at a different angle. And then I can still see underneath it. So I could still wrap this with rubber bands. And I could see the other elements underneath there. All right? Okay. Now, a next step above this, I was going to save that for the next time we meet. I was going to talk about carving into shapes and creating other shapes. So we talked about the cube. We talked real quick about spheres. And then we talked about wedge shapes of the spheres by distorting them. We talked about doing even quarters of them. Okay. Well, here's another organic shape that's also really cool that could come to that can be fun to draw, and it's a little bit different. What if we do this? What if we have an ellipse here like this? What if we put another ellipse next to it? So what if we draw a line coming down the middle there, another line coming down the middle here? What if I find the middle? What if I bring that point up a little like that? And then I bring this point up a little bit like that. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and draw what I would call like the cross section connecting through that shape like this. Now I'm going to connect them. This line is going to go up to there. But now here's the part where it's a little bit different. This line is going to connect back down to here. Now I get to go in here and conjoin these two and put a curve in here like so. And then I can round, it's up to me. I can bring that body line down and round it like that. Or I could come in here and just make it go straight across like that. It doesn't matter. But you see what I just did? I just took two elliptical shapes, merged them together, and then I just created this new sort of different shape. So can you imagine this right here being, so let me add a little bit of detail on it. You might look at that and that might not look like anything to you, but if I come back on this, and if I'm drawing a mech, and if I want this to be like a canopy, I could then come in here and I could imagine this being some type of a really cool detail element like this, where I might have, I might have part of a canopy for a mech. And then there might be a little thing, a little detail element here. There might be a center line here. Maybe part of this is organic and it's like a metal side covering that wraps around that. I could feel that flow of items wrapping around it like this. And then I can come back here. I can do the same thing I did up there. I can put another detail strip there. I can bring another side curve into there. I can bring that side curve back. And now, you see how that now becomes like a canopy for two fighter pilots that'd be sitting in there? Then I could come in here and I could start to sketch the rough shape of their chair fitting in there. I'm just going to do it real rough. I'm not going to put detail on it. So there might be a chair there. There might be an instrument cluster sitting in front of them. I could then come back here, transfer some of that information. So I could put as much detail as I want into it. What's important to me is understanding the construction of moving these two elements together and what shapes made these. I mean, let me back up here for another minute. If I take the detail off, the detail is always icing on the cake. It's not that important to me. And the detail could change. I can take multiple shapes and clean them up. Look at this shape right here. Look at that cube that's there. I could turn that into an airplane or I could turn that into a submarine. Can you imagine that being both of those? If I turned it into an airplane, all I would have to do is put a round inside that cube shape. I would establish where the round ellipse is. I would draw the side of the ellipse. I'd find where the wings come off. And then boom, then that would become an airplane. And then this, obviously, there'd be a point here. And it'd be foreshortened. I might have a canopy up here. Might have a tail fin there. And now you can see it becoming an airplane, right? Okay, if that's not, I could do the opposite. I could come back here. I could round this. And if I look at a submarine reference, submarines have stabilizing fins come off the side of them. They have a center that comes up here that conjoins into a here in the shape. That then comes up like so, and that rounds up here on the top. They usually have little stabilizing fins in the back. Sometimes they have a little bit of angles. They have little torpedo bays up here on the sides. So do you see how that now turned into a submarine? It doesn't matter. I could turn it into whatever I want it to be. I could turn it into a stack of boxes. I could just come in here and draw the lines for boxes intersecting each other like this. I could have a box there. I could have a box here. And then I could put detail, like I could have some tape running across the box. I can put, you know, who it's from. I could put the label of who it's going to. And now it's a stack of boxes. So all of that is just linear detail that goes on top of it. The most important aspect of everything that I'm drawing here today is understanding what the core shape is that makes it up, and then going from there. So we talked about cubes real quick. We talked about spheres. Okay. How about we talk about another great shape I love to draw are wedges and triangles. Okay. So let's talk about those really quick. These are also very fun to draw. So when we talk about wedge shapes, wedges are actually pretty easy. There's all different types of wedge shapes. So wedges can be based off of a basic square like this. Okay. And a wedge, usually what it is, it's just a pinched top. So if I come up here and I'm just going to pick a random line. In this example, I'm just going to draw a line up from here to here. Where these lines hit, I'm then going to draw a line going across. And then I'm basically just going to connect a line freehand here going from there to there. So that's like a basic wedge. Okay. And my wedge also has a center line that goes down it and connects up and should match back up to the other side. Oops, sorry. My shifted a little bit there, like that. Now, what happens when I come back in and if I draw a wedge shape and I off shift the center? So here, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to draw the basics of a basic square, right? Now I'm going to use this line right here as part of my center line. I'm going to bring that up to here, and then I'm going to bring that out to there, and I bring this line up to here. Now my wedge shape is going to have two angled sides to it, right? Can you see that? I'm going to have this side that connects to that side right there, and I'm going to have that side that connects to that side, and that side that connects to there. So now my wedge shape is a little bit different because it has another angled wedge to it, another angled side to it, right? Okay. What happens if I have a wedge shape? It's not really a wedge shape. This is when we get into triangular shapes, basically. But what happens when I have a base? It's like this. That's a pinched triangle like that. That's fine. And so there's a couple options that I could do here, but basically what's going to happen is if I draw a center line down there, I pick a center point, I just draw a line straight up. Once that line's straight up, that represents the height of that angular shape. I then just connect all the dots back and forth. So if I come back in here, take my little trusty ruler, I have a line that goes back there. I'm going to have a line that comes back to here. And then I'm going to have a line that comes back into there right there. Okay, so now what kind of shapes am I creating? These are like little spiky, there could be three-sided and four-sided little triangle shapes, right? So let's come over here. Let's draw one upside down. What if I have four-sided? What if I'm here and then I have the shape going like this and then it's angling off a little bit like here? I'm going to come to this middle point. I'm going to draw a line coming down. That represents the height of it. And then all I'm going to do is connect all those lines together. I'm going to draw a line going from there to there. I'm going to come in here and draw another line going to there and another line going to here. Okay. However, though, look at the difference. This is a four-sided shape. Right? It has four sides here. One, it has two, and then three and four in the back. And then this one down here only had three. Okay. So, this is, we'll keep going. We'll talk about a couple other shapes here. I like the idea of filling up a page every time we meet, because if I can fill up a page, your goal as students should be to then also fill up pages like this in your sketchbook. Just go draw simple shapes. You can draw cars and vehicles without having to do all the detail. Just draw the blocky construction shape that they existed. That's all you really need to do. Did you have a question there, Tim? Okay. All right.
No, I'm just listening.
Okay. So let me come back here, and I'm trying to think what another shape. So we talked about spheres. We talked about cubes. We talked about cutting halves of spheres off and getting these little wedge teardrop shapes. We talked about angled wedges. Okay. Another cool sort of shape to draw. Everyone likes to draw the donut or the torus. I really don't care for it that much. I don't use it. What it is it's basically this. Let me see if I can zoom in here real quick. And it's a really complex shape to draw. And I'll tell you why I don't really draw the shape that much. This is what it is. It's basically drawing a donut like this. But then in your donut, there's going to be a thickness to that donut. So if we come over here and wrap a circle around that, and then if we come over here and wrap that shape there, and wrap it here, and wrap it here, and wrap it there, it's then connecting the lines here where, hold on a minute. Now, and my lines went a little bit below the center line. That's okay. I'm going to come here, get one there, get one there. So basically what this torus shape is us connecting all these lines then like this. It's like drawing a donut. And then inside the donut, we're going to have these tops will be coming together. And then they'll sort of it'll wrap like this, come along to part of there. And then the bottom of the donut will come over and it'll wrap into here like this. And depending on the angle that you're looking at that donut, you can see through the hole if it's turned right. Okay. If I had students do this, what I usually tell them to do is cut a section of the donut off. And there's a reason for that. The reason why I would tell them to cut the section off is because now I can see, oops, I switched to the wrong color. Now I can see where that shape ends there. And then I could see where this cutaway would be here. And then most importantly, I can see the back right there. You see that? And that gives it a little bit more dimensionality in the element there. Now, there's a reason why I don't do that. In my background of drawing and experience, I'll post this, Griffin. I'm going to post it live on YouTube. In my background of drawing, I don't really have to draw that shape much, but this is a shape I do have to do, which is something I learned in Maya. When we're working, we have this ability to take a NURBS curve. And what we can do with a NURBS curve is this. Okay, here, let me do it so I'm looking down on it, okay, over here. So a NURBS curve would be this. A NURBS curve is just a curve like this, okay? It's just a really simple curve that we might see. Hold on, I didn't mean to make that into an S, like that. But then on the NURBS curve, what you could do is you could attach round little NURBS, and then you could extrude along a path, which is a really, really great tool for modeling. So I just do that drawing, and this is something I use more than I use drawing this donut shape up here. That donut shape is cool, but it's not really as important to me as being able to do this. If I take that line there, and if I come in here and put a bunch of cross sections on it, and going from smaller, and here I'll go even, I'll go a little bit larger here. I'll go a little bit smaller there. And then here I'll go a little bit smaller. And then here I'll get a little bit larger, and then I'll go smaller again. This is something I use all the time, especially when drawing trees or organics. I'll use that ideology from Maya. I'll draw that NURBS curve, and now I'll connect lines on top of it. And then I'll run these lines down, and I'll match these lines up to the flow. Right here, there should be a little bit of a line that signifies that change in the shape moving, and then it'll come back to there. Then it'll come back up to the top here, and then it'll come back down to there. So this is really important because that line that I just drew there, that allows me to figure out tree roots. It allows me to figure out organic shapes, cockpits, all kinds of really interesting moving elements that are going to be totally different. So to me, when I look at this, all this shape really is, this torus donut shape, It's just a center line with a series of cross sections attached to it that draws into that method. Okay. Well, what happens when you're not, I don't draw many shapes that are always round and curve like that. I end up having to draw shapes that are going from like thick to thin. That might be like this. I might have, for example, like drawing a stalactite or a stalagmite. Okay. I might have something that's coming down from a ceiling like this. So I might have a center line there. What I need to do is come over here now and plot and think about, okay, this is going to be an elliptical shape right here. And my ellipse is going to be going over like this, dot, 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 dot to the other side. Then my ellipse is going to be pretty much, I'm going to have another one about here. I'm going to have one here. Let's say I have one here like this. Okay. So now my ellipse, I'm going to think about this and go, okay, my ellipse is going to curve here, dot, dot, dot. And my next ellipse shape will be here. Oops, sorry. I slipped a little bit. Every now and then, one of the things I hate about drawing on a Cintiq versus traditional paper, where'd it go? I have I call this my Michael Jackson glove of drawing. It's my little black glove for my Cintiq. And the thing I like about it and don't like about it, when it's on, my hand like slips on the Cintiq. But then if I draw a lot on the Cintiq, I get this little hard callus thing on my end of my pinky right there that like irks me because I could feel it hitting in the Cintiq. Then I got to go back to my glove, my Michael Jackson glove. But then when I have that glove on, I'm like sliding all around the Cintiq. So there's like not a win scenario. Anyway, so do you see what I did here? I basically have a center line, and then I have that center line with a series of what I think of as nerves curves going along, but they're not really nerves curves. They're just really just basic shapes. No worries, Griffin. I'll put this up. Okay. Something important to that. No worries. Thanks for coming by, Griffin. I appreciate it. So now I'm just going to come over here like this, and I'm just going to connect the edges of these lines together like so, and look at what that does. It helps me create that form that might be, I forget which one comes from the top. Is it stalagmites, I believe, come from the bottom, stalactites? There's a way to remember it, but my brain's not functioning on all cylinders today. But the reason why this is important to me is this. Now I can get a better feel of part of the texture that would wrap around that shape. So if I go to paint this, I could feel the body of that shape in there, and I have a better feeling of how that texture is going to wrap around because I can draw through the shape and I can find those rubber band elements inside there. So that's a different complex shape, you know. Another great example of another organic shape with cross sections that I draw all the time are clouds. So if I'm drawing a piece, I might go like this, and I might have, let me get a little bit more windy. I'll get something like this. And then what I do is I'm looking up underneath it, right? It's above my horizon line. So then I'll come in here and I'll sketch what might be like the cloud base like this. And then this cloud base is going back sort of this way. Okay, then I do the cross sections of the cloud like this. So that represents sort of the underneath of the cloud. Then I come back in and I draw the top of the cloud going like this. So I can now figure out my cloud shape, and it'll make sense because I ran off the paper here, but bear with me. Ran off the edge there like this. And this makes sense to me because if I go to paint my cloud, I'm thinking of how my cloud exists like this. I have a cross section here that goes to here, and then I have a back side to my cloud that's going this way. Same thing here. Oops, I don't know how that happened. I magically changed brushes without hitting anything. And then the same thing happens here. I come over here, I wrap that center line around, and I come down to the back. So can you see how that's sort of a cloud shape in there, even though it got squashed a little bit? But what it allows me to do, it allows me to understand this with part of my cloud that I'm drawing, is that if light's coming in that direction, I've established shape and form of the cloud and the reed. So I know this will have the highlights on it. And then I know basically, let me back up there, to make that look a little bit more realistic, basically the underneath part here of my cloud will then be in the shadow. That'll be sort of like the shadow side right there. So that's how my clouds become looking realistically. Now, if I go back and take off the detail I put on that cloud real quick, all I'm basically creating here is this really simple, hold on, let me get my brush smaller. I'm just thinking of this being cross sections like this. This goes up, it has a cross section there, has a cross section there, a cross section there. And here I ran out of a little bit of space. I had to squeeze my cross section in there, but I basically connected these lines together. And I'm looking underneath this, so I see that line like so. Like this. Let me erase what I did there real quick so I can bring it back this way, like that. Okay. All right, so I'm thinking of it of having a top point, and then that's, again, that's just an organic shape. There's no difference to it. Okay. All right. So organic shapes. Okay. And just here, let me zoom out real quick. Look at what we've drawn today, just a variety of different elements. There are, again, I sort of want to wrap it up here real quick. I know a student wanted me to draw that beetle. So all I would do on the beetle now, I would come back to my bug body that I did here. Okay. And if I'm looking at the beetle has 2 points to it. It has a frontal head that has a horn that comes off of it. And then it has this really cool back. And there's actually a couple of different types of beetles. There's one called the horn beetle. It has like one big horn like a rhinoceros. Then there's another one. What was this one called when I was looking up some of the reference? It has a series of horns coming off of it. Okay. So what I might do on this shape right now, it's a little foreshortened, so it might look a little complex. Well, I'm looking at some of my reference. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do this. I'm going to draw a line coming off of this. Okay. Let me see where all my lines are. Yeah, unfortunately, I drew it on white underneath. So what I'm going to have to do is I'll have to fill in with white because I made the numbskull mistake of drawing it all on the wrong layer. So what I'm going to do in this shape right now is I'm just going to draw a rounded shape coming off of this. So if I come off here, I'm going to come up to about the front of the head shape, and I'm just going to put a rounded off this line here. I'm going to round this up right here. Do you see that? Okay, let me get the same color, by the way. I'm on a different color by accident. I'm usually about there. So once I get that rounded head shape in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that rounded head shape then back to the body to here. And then if I follow that center line that goes right here, it's going to hit there. It's going to come up. So I'm going to imagine the front of my bug hitting about here and coming about there right now. Okay, so now I just added a head shape. Now what I'm going to do to make it a little bit easier is since I drew on the wrong layer, I'm going to add a little bit of white, and I'm going to lightly sort of paint in with my brush with white at about 2%. And I'm going to try to tone maybe 4 or 5%. I'm going to push this down so you can't really see as much of what's back there. In terms of the construction, I'm even going to erase this a little bit. I'm going to erase that. I'm going to get rid of that there. Okay. So now I have part of that head body shape. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to look at that horn shape that exists on side. And remember, there's a couple different, there's one called a bighorn beetle. There's another one called torus beetle that has 5 to 6 horn shapes. There's another one that's called what is this one here? Primilineus beetle, which has more of like this dinosaur shape in the back with one horn. So I'm just going to come over here and focus on the one horn. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line that goes back into this direction, which is for that center line right there. See that? My center line would come, connect to there, it goes to here, and then it basically be elevated above my ground about that high. Okay, and then here's my head shape. Oops, hold on a minute. What happened here? Brush. There it is. There's my line shape. There's my center line. I might put a little bit of a line going down here. So I'm going to come over here and imagine that horn shape that should be hitting about there. And then I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to draw this large horn. I'm going to draw a horn coming up this way. And it's going to overlap part of my other shape, which is fine. But here's going to be my horn coming off my bug right there. And then when that's done, I'm going to come in here and erase some of the overlap so I can see that horn shape a little bit. Voila, I have that horn in there. I like the one that has this curved back to it. So what I'm going to do in my drawing then is I'm going to come back here before I hit this back cube shape here for the body. I'm going to come in right about here. And then I'm going to extend that rounded protective curve that come out. So what it does is it sort of curves upwards in this direction so that it curves up to about here. And then it wraps around like this part of the body coming back down a little bit. So it curves out a little bit. And it's this really cool, like looking sort of prehistoric shape that wraps out. So it's curving to here. And then I could follow the other curve lines. It's going to come in here. It's going to curve there and have a little bit of a curve coming in there. And then it gives me a better idea. Even part of that line will come down. I might see a little bit of the curve on the opposite side right there. Okay. So that's how I would get. Now the body shape was a little bit different. I have this large cube shape in here. The horned beetle, once it hits this apex right here, then the body starts to curve back a little bit. So I'm basically cutting into my shape, and I would be erasing all of this to now get that other detail that's in there. So what I can do is, we're going to run out of time here in a couple minutes. And I wanted to do a quick recap on everything that I drew today, just to go over. So it's easy for me when I'm drawing and answering questions to bounce on multiple topics. Okay. So I could go, what I'd like to do is at next class, talk about the next time we meet next Friday, a little bit more different organic shapes and some other more complex shapes. Then what we could do is we could do a whole page after that one on bugs. We can draw bugs from different angles. And there's something else we need to talk about, which is this term I sort of created called triangle of measure. And triangle of measure is how we figure out things like horns and wings coming at different angles. There's a way to draw that correctly. Okay. So what I'm going to do right now is let me just do a quick recap on some of the principles that we talked about today and why they're important. Okay. The first recap, step number one, is whenever we're drawing shapes, we always want to draw through the other side. So that's us. So I'll come over here. I'll write a little, I'm not going to write it down like I do in my notes in perspective, but it's us drawing these little dotted lines, figuring out where the other side is. And the reason why that's so important, it's important for a couple of reasons. One, it gives us a sense of three-dimensional detail very quickly, and it makes it tangible. Number two, it allows us then when we come into an object and when we add center lines, it allows us very quickly and efficiently not only to see the center line that we're drawing, but it allows us to match up. Because remember, perspective has a way of checking itself. And if I come up here and if I draw this line coming back up here, and then when I go to connect these two lines that are way back in the shape, I can look and have a general feel if my perspective is feeling correct. Is my distance from here to here feeling accurate? Does the distance from there to there feel accurate? And that'll give you a good idea if your freehand in your drawing and your perspective is feeling a little bit better. So step number one is we always draw through the shape. Step number two, whenever I am drawing shapes, I'm always thinking about what the center line is, how the center line cuts through the other side of the body, and then how these lines are sort of always matching up to each other. And the benefit of having these center lines match up is what? Really quick. This was sort of a next term that goes into next week. Every time I'm thinking about drawing a center line in, what is my center line also doing for my drawing?
Dividing it in half, or?
It had to do with right here. There's a term for this. Remember when I draw these little guys here, what did I call them? Cross sections. So, but you're right, Taha, it is dividing it in half, but what it's also doing is it's creating a nice cross section to the middle of a piece. And when you move to drawing more advanced subject matter like vehicles and airplanes and mechs, that center line is pivotal for measuring proportional division. It's pivotal for measuring your object above the ground plane. So that becomes, in like here, you see where I had my center line there. I knew my bug is that high above the ground, because then I could transfer that scale back and forth left and right, because then it allows me to figure where the legs might be connecting. It allows me to figure where the back of the body might be connecting, right? Here, that center line allowed me to figure where the height is there. It allowed me to bring a line, bring a line over to here and figure where the legs are landing in the front, which allows me then to take that scale of that mark and transfer it over there to make sure my legs are being consistent. That center line also is a form of measurement where I can measure and look at that distance from there to there. You see that? Then when I come over to the other side, I can use that as a form to check myself, and I can make sure that that distance from here to here is feeling equal, that mark there and that mark there are feeling respectable to each other in type and size. So there's a huge benefit for always coming into our drawings and having a series of center lines. The center lines, and this is the part that I find is quite often never taught anymore in colleges. You might have a couple instructors that talk a little bit about shape, but then they leave it there. They don't, after they're talking about shape, they don't talk anymore about drawing through the shape, and then they don't talk anymore about really understanding the center line and how the center line plays a really pivotal part of dividing up that shape. Okay. The reason why the center line is also very important is it allows us to do something like this. Okay. Look, if I look over at this drawing right here, and if I come in here, I'm going to do this center line in blue right now. If I put a center line, it goes from that ellipse to that ellipse right there. Okay. So do you see how this ellipse comes in here and around to there? And then, and sorry if I'm a little bit off there, but that's okay. And then I have that's in there. That center line now allows me, and this is the benefit of when we go to more complex shapes, it allows me to now come in and cut out chunks of my drawing like this. And it allows me to make sure that it's still working. Do you see that? I could quickly come into a drawing and start cutting additive and subtractive method of drawing. I could start cutting chunks out of a drawing very effectively. And check this out again. If I come back here and throw center lines on this, I have a center line, I have a center line that goes there. I have a center line that goes across there. That center line then wraps over the middle of this, and then it's coming on the back side here. So you see the benefit of me going in and having those center lines in there? When I move to more advanced shape construction, allows me to quickly go in and start cutting chunks out of shape. So look at this. Look at this center line here. If I bring that center line up to there, and then if I come in here and I cut the end off of this, I draw a line straight down to there, right? I now would then draw a line from here to here connecting. And then I could come back here with my brush and I can erase this and this. I just cut a chunk off of excuse me, I wasn't paying attention. I did it off the center line. My bad. I didn't mean to do that. I meant to do it here. I meant to come in here and, oops, let me go back to blue. I lost my blue. My bad, guys. I was not paying attention for a minute. I meant to cut the tip off of this here to here like that. So if I do that, I'm using my center line to start the measure. I come up to here. I go across. Now I erase what I just cut out. Look at that. I just took a chunk out of my shape. It's right there. Do you see that? And it makes sense because I could figure out how it's connecting to the other side. I can still see the back of my center line going this way. In fact, I could do that over and over. I could come back here. What if I take a chunk out here in my shape? And what if I cut that out? I have to be able to draw through the shape to find that, and then I connect those two lines together. And if I go back and take my eraser and erase what I no longer have and see anymore, look at how much of a complex shape I'm creating very quickly here. You see how that has a very sort of organic feel to it? It was a wedge, right? But now I just came in, and on that wedge, I just took out basically that side, and then I took out that side. So that's
that wedge shape. That wedge shape is not only the core of stairs, but it's also the core of like stones as well, right?
Yes. Yeah, so, and that's a good example. We just talked about that in perspective class. Drawing staircases. Staircases are based off of wedges. So there's a way in perspective to mathematically figure out that angle of that wedge, and then the stairs sort of fit inside there. Well, with that, do you see how that looks like it could be some type of alien gem or complex shape now? All I did was go into there and cut it in two places. I just took a simple wedge and turned it. And watch, what if I did that to the other side? Look, I could draw a line back here. I can now cut that off right there. So if I take that and I erase this, this is where next week's lecture is sort of going into, is creating more complex shapes based off of simple shapes. And let me do the same thing here. Let me transfer that height of this line back down to there. This was the middle marker here, so I didn't quite hit the middle. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to draw a line going across there, and then I'm going to come in here and erase this. Voila. Now I have this really complex wedge shape, and I just trim the corners off of it, and it looks really cool. It's like a totally different element. It's a different shape. So again, the importance of what I wanted to leave you guys with today was really understanding the benefit of not only drawing through shapes, but also being able to find center lines and being able to divide up your shapes to understand what is really happening and going on inside your drawing. Okay? If you get this approach, it will make it easier for you when your mileage increases, and you'll have a better understanding of how you're constantly dividing up shapes and creating new shapes and bringing all these shapes together to create new interesting shapes. Okay? All right? So I'm going to wrap up because I do have another meeting coming up here in just a little bit. Uh-oh, how did I do that? What I'm going to do is I'll post this up on YouTube and make it available. And I like doing these where we meet on a Friday and talk. And then this way, I'm also getting to reach out to some of our community in the drawing world that get to see, you know, I have, what's really cool I like about putting stuff up on YouTube is I have kids in classes, you know, in like elementary and junior high, and sometimes they're getting to watch these videos. So I learned some of this stuff when I was in junior high. When I was in 7th grade, I had a really awesome teacher whose name was Mr. Graber. And Mr. Graber taught us at Bernardo Yorba Junior High in Southern California. He taught us basic principles of a horizon line and shapes and how to cut into those shapes. And that I didn't really pay attention to it because I'm in 7th grade. I'm like looking at Dungeons and Dragons manuals and Mad Magazine and cool car illustrations, you know, and people were airbrushing back then, and they weren't, you know, but it taught me a fundamental of drawing to understand about what's happening. So what I'd like to do is do a couple more of these and then eventually go into some more complex things, like let's draw some vehicles, let's draw spaceships, and let's draw what happens when we have a castle, what happens when we have a vertical frame and we have a castle going above a horizon line that's breaking out into multiple complex shapes. How do we draw that? That's where the level of this starts to quadruple and get more and more complex. And again, you're not going to be able to digital paint. You're not going to be able to draw right if you don't have this fundamental understanding of knowing what shapes are doing, drawing through the shapes, and how to find their center line. So that was sort of what today's focus and topic was going to be about. Okay? All right, I got to go, guys. I have another meeting at 11. So take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you again.
See you soon.